My name is Julian Francis, and in 1971 I was Oxfam Special Representative in Calcutta. I remember the journey I made in January 1972 when I drove from Calcutta. And of course, the road from Calcutta to Jessore, where we stayed overnight, was jam-packed with refugees going home, mostly walking, not on vehicles. And we stayed overnight in an Italian mission hospital, where an Italian father had been killed by the Pakistani soldiers, and his crime was to have given medical treatment to the Mukti Bahini over a number of months. The second day we made for the river crossing, but we had to wait for hours because of shortage of ferries, and also the crossing was very difficult because there were sunken boats and other ferries, and so they had to navigate very, very carefully. And when we talked to some of the refugees going home, they were apprehensive about what they were going to find. And as we travelled through, we saw many villages that were burned down, completely destroyed. So if they were going back to those sort of villages, one could understand their great apprehension. But there was a lot of shouting of Joy Bangla. We were carrying mostly valuable medicines. One of the problems was that we never knew how many months the crisis was going to go on in India. So we always were planning 3 or 4 months ahead. So we had stocks of medicine and other material which suddenly we weren't going to need. So we had to find homes for that material. And so to begin with, we filled up the Land Rover and the trailer with antibiotics and other medicines. We saw in Cooch Behar and other places 10,000, 20,000 a day at one crossing point. And so the problem was obviously going to be enormous. And quickly we worked out 5 areas of concentration together with our Gandhian connections, and we tried not to work near Calcutta because everybody else was working in Calcutta or working in Salt Lake, the biggest refugee camp, 250,000, and we worked with a relief coordinating council in Tripura, also convened by a man called Kirod Sen, who was a Gandhi Peace Foundation, and then supported work in Assam, Meghalaya, Cooch Behar, and Jalpaiguri, Siliguri, and then further down south. And we were really involved with the medical, sanitation, clothing, child nutrition, malnutrition, feeding, to begin with 500,000, but it grew to 600,000 by December 1971. So the biggest relief operation Oxfam had ever undertaken in its history till then. We had big campaigns in England, but it was very difficult because to begin with, the horror on the front pages in early April, I mean, that we were able, it was in the attention of the public, raising money was not that difficult, relatively speaking, but then you can't keep it on the front pages all the time. So then when the cholera epidemic hit, that was front pages again. And then when the camps were flooded, again front pages. So, but the fundraising needed very, very professional advertising, and probably advertising that would not be allowed today, because the advertising had to shock people to put hands in their pockets. In September, Oxfam, or many senior directors, in consultation with us in the field, said we must try to organise a film or something to wake the world up, to get governments, British government and other governments and the United Nations, more active in solving the problem. And we called it the crisis in Bengal, meaning both sides of the border. And so it was decided that we should collect statements from people who had been in the field, mostly in the refugee camps, but also some who had been in then East Pakistan. And so we were able to collect written statements from important people like Mother Teresa and Edward Kennedy, some of the leading journalists of those days, and John Pilger, Claire Hollingworth, Nicholas Tomlin, and also interview a lot of other relief workers, Indians and expatriates working in the refugee camp. So in a very short time this document got put together. Well, I was coordinating the collection of many of the statements in Calcutta, and so I personally wrote down as Mother Teresa spoke, and also other relief workers, and a leading Gandhian who is still alive today, Narayan Desai. His statement is there, and he was active in organising Gandhian volunteers to come to the camps. And then, so it was published on October the 21st, 71, to coincide with the opening of the United Nations General Assembly, so that copies were given to all the ambassadors, as well as many heads of state around, particularly in the Western world. And then a remarkable thing happened. Only a week after it was published, Senator Kennedy introduced it to the Senate and said, and asked with an opening, a very powerful opening statement. He said, this is evidence of what is happening on the ground. And with no objections from anybody in the Senate, which was quite surprising at the time, it was adopted, and it became, the whole text was reproduced in the congressional record. And with the work of other senators, Senator Church and Senator Saxby, then that had quite an influence on stopping arms being supplied to Pakistan. I heard the news of the surrender, and therefore Bangladesh has been liberated, late in the evening on the 16th, and that was from a phone call from a colleague in my office who had come over as a refugee. He had come over from Chittagong, and he was so emotional on the phone and in tears that I wasn't sure quite about it. So I wanted to check it out, and I went round to the Grand Hotel where many journalists were staying, and they strongly confirmed that yes, this has happened. Yes, somebody from the High Commission, British High Commission, had suggested that we pay a courtesy call So I went there. Of course, many people were going to see him, not just foreigners, of course, people just going there because he had come back only 10 or 12 days before. And so he was surprisingly well informed about Oxfam. Obviously, some reports had been shown to him about what Oxfam had done when. And so I said, well, I wanted some advice about what a relatively small organisation like Oxfam could do in Bangladesh in terms of rehabilitation. And he took his pipe out of his mouth and pointed the stem at me and said, "How did you come here, young man?" And I said, well, I drove overland from Calcutta. And he said, in that case, you have seen more of my country than I have, because I've been in jail in Pakistan for the last 9 months. So what does my country need? And what did you see? And so then I told him about the many burnt out villages and destroyed, blown up culverts and bridges and sunken ferries. And I said, I don't think rebuilding bridges and replacing ferries is something that Oxfam can do. It's probably a bilateral or multilateral assistance needed. And he said, no, ferries, please see what you can do about repairing existing ferries or even buying new ferries, because they are the lifeline of my country. And then I talked to the Inland Waterways Authority people, and that was the preliminary discussion that eventually led to the purchase of 3 ferries, repairs of many, but repurchase of 3. And sometimes I travel on them when I go to Faridpur or Rajbari. They're still plying Kasturi, Kamini and Korabi.